So this is an introduction to chapter 20 of McCay, the revolution in energy and industry, basically the Industrial Revolution chapter. It covers 1780 to 1850, so it mostly overlaps with chapter 19 on the political revolutions. And like I said there, this is one of the two great dual revolutions that end the 18th century and set up the 19th century. And you can have arguments over, which is more important, which is more consequential. I would probably argue that the Industrial Revolution in the long run matters more than the French, but the two of them together very much shape the 19th century and then the 20th century and what comes next. Whereas chapter 19 is mostly political history, chapter 20 is mostly economic history. So here are the big questions for this chapter. First, sort of the classic one, which is, why does the Industrial Revolution happen in Europe, and why does it begin in England? This is the classic debate, right? Why England? Why the 18th century? What is it about that? Is it the special resources that England has? Is it the special confluence of government and finance? Is it that England is blessed with these particularly extraordinarily talented entrepreneurs, kind of great man theory of economic development? There's lots and lots of different arguments about this, but you need to bear that in mind as you work through this material. You should ask yourself who benefits from industrialization. And when you're thinking about that, you also need to think about when. Notice that this chapter only goes up to 1850, so it's the first part of the Industrial Revolution. And one of the things that we'll see is that up till about 1850, the Industrial Revolution does not seem to benefit workers very much, if at all. And in fact, the standards of living for workers are stagnant or maybe even regress, which is saying quite a lot. So if the workers are suffering as a result of industrialization, who's benefiting from all of this new wealth? Now again, that regression for workers is a first half of the 19th century thing. It will change as we move forward in history, but for right now, be sure to bear in mind who's winning this. And then finally, sort of the classic social history question, which is, how does the Industrial Revolution change society? What are the impacts on daily lives of all of this tremendous economic growth and change? So you'll need to think about that as we move through this. Okay, so McCay is basically 4 sections in this chapter. The first one is straightforward. It's the Industrial Revolution in England. And the question that he puts here is, what were the origins of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and how did it develop between 1780 and 1850? Pretty straightforward, right? This is a story, a chronological telling of what the Industrial Revolution was, why it begins where it begins, and in particular, why England. Pay attention to McCay's argument about why it begins there. There's a nice little section in this in here called the Steam Age, a little text box. Do be sure to pay attention to it. It's not primary sources, but it does emphasize something important, which we don't always spend enough time in class, which is the transformational effect of steam, and in particular railroads. You got to remember the importance of railroads. They show up here, and they're worthy of your attention. Okay, next McCay moves on to industrialization beyond Britain, industrialization on the continent. And here the question is, how do countries outside of Britain respond to the challenges of industrialization? And this is almost, a story of catch-up. There are these trends happening throughout the 18th century, and then industrialization explodes in England, and the continent has to deal with that and react. So this is the chapter, or the section of the chapter that breaks that up and tries to talk about the Netherlands and France and Germany and places like that, and sort of talk about how they are going to react to this British industrialization. Then we move on to new patterns of working and living. This is sort of the lived experience of industrialization, and here the question is, how does work evolve during the Industrial Revolution, and how does it change the lives of people who are doing that work? Really, pretty straightforward social history as it's part of your work life. And here you'll get some of the grimness of the Industrial Revolution, but also some of the progress. There's a section in here which you do want to make sure you read, a primary source called Advice for Middle-Class Women. And this charming lady writes this manual, which is excerpted, and in it she explains the, shall we say, rather limited role that she foresees for middle-class women. And what you're going to see here is the beginning of the whole concept of separate spheres, that women are temperamentally, physically constituted to do certain things and not other things, to be a support for people who work and not to be workers themselves. So this is the beginning of a very powerful vision of gender relations, and it's worthy of your attention. And then finally, the fourth section is about economic relations, economic politics, if you will, the relations between capital and labor. And the idea here is that McCay wants to talk about how the changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution led to new social classes and how people responded to these new structures. So we have a whole new sense of class now. The classes, the estates that existed in medieval society, for example, in which the French Revolution attacked, are going to be replaced by new classes which are defined by economic power and economic position. And those are going to really define European politics, for centuries to come. So this chapter may not have some of the fireworks that we see in chapter 19 with the French Revolution, but it is arguably the more important of the dual revolutions. And as you go through all this and you're thinking about these things, also reach back to what comes before. Think about chapters 17 and 18, the expansion of Europe and life in the 18th century, and ask yourself, to what extent is the Industrial Revolution revolutionary? Is this really a massive sudden change, or is this continuation of gradual processes that existed before? We'll talk about that kind of thing also. All right, these are really interesting, complicated questions. I look forward to going through them with you, and I'll see you in class.